So this work is trying to understand the impact of migrant earnings on the economic outcomes of places where migrants come from. So this is a big question on the planet. Migrant remittances that are sent to developing countries amount to about $400 billion a year, which is about at least 3 times as large as foreign aid flows. Foreign aid flows, official development assistance or ODA, gets a huge amount of attention. There's a lot of economic research on the impact of foreign aid going into developing countries, but there's not nearly as much research on the impact of remittances and migrant earnings opportunities. So this is one of the first studies on the planet that looks at the impact of migrant earnings opportunities and migrant earnings in general on development outcomes in migrants' home areas. We're looking at the impact in the Philippines. We're looking across several hundred, about 800 municipalities across the Philippines, and how they're affected over a 2-decade period by inflows of resources from migrants. The one thing that we're doing is we're taking advantage of a natural experiment. The Asian financial crisis caused a huge shock to migrant earnings that were coming into different parts of the Philippines, basically because different places had different levels of migrant earnings to begin with, and then when the Philippines experienced a big exchange rate depreciation, they then got very big changes in the resources, the peso value of the remitted migrant earnings coming into these localities. So we take advantage of that shock and we look at how this big new inflow of migrant earnings affected development outcomes across these 800 municipalities. So mainly we look at asset ownership, ownership of durable goods, housing quality, investments in housing and utilities in the household. We also look at investments in child schooling, and we finally look at whether people are doing more investment in household small enterprises, entrepreneurship of various sorts. What we find is very positive for the impact of migrant earnings. Places that got bigger positive shocks to migrant earnings did see higher asset ownership over the course, higher levels of asset ownership over the course of the next decade or so. In addition, we see that households do more investment in child schooling, both in the sort of elementary years as well as secondary schooling. There's an increase and a sustained increase in child schooling investments. When it comes to household entrepreneurship, we don't find too much on that front. So there's not really much of a positive or negative impact on either employment levels or entrepreneurial work by the affected localities. So we can take that. So there's not really much of a positive or negative message for that matter in terms of people's labor supply or people's entrepreneurial work. So overall, we view this as an important piece of evidence. It's very rare for a study to be able to look at how local economic outcomes, economic outcomes at the local level are affected by migrant resources coming in from overseas. This is one of the first studies on the planet to do this. And it really helps underline the positive development benefits that can accrue when localities get improvements in their migrant earnings opportunities. And I think it'll contribute to the broader literature on how international migration and the remittances that migrants send home affect development in their home areas.